Hi, and welcome to the Choose FI Foundation's Educational Speaker Series, where we take topics from the Choose FI Foundation's pre-K through 12 financial literacy curriculum and break it down with expert speakers in the area to bring a little bit more information and ideas to the topic. Hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, this is Rob Phelan. I'm here with Cody Berman. Cody is a personal finance coach who focuses on helping people in their 20s work on their wealth, building their income, getting their expenses under control, and just overall getting better with their money. Cody, how you doing?
Doing awesome. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So Cody, how are you in your 20s and so good with money right now? Like what happened? What did you do? This isn't you're not the usual guest I have on.
Definitely going to give some credit to my parents. So growing up, they definitely kind of gave me the right mindset, telling me that I should be saving money. I shouldn't be spending every single dollar that came in. And it didn't have like a crazy amount of personal finance education. It wasn't like my dad was Dave Ramsey or my mom was Susie Orman or anything like that. And for those of you who don't know who those people are, they're very influential people in the personal finance space. But I at least had that baseline understanding of saving is pretty good. And so as I progressed through middle school and high school, picked up little odd jobs or side hustles, and I was saving as much money as I could. And then early college, I figured out about this financial independence movement, that people were retiring in their 20s, in their early 30s, in their 40s, just way younger than I'd ever heard of anyone retiring before. Got really interested in that. And that's kind of my whole story in a nutshell. And now I spend most of my time kind of teaching other people those same lessons that I didn't learn in school. I didn't learn from anyone else. It was kind of just my own curiosity diving into the internet rabbit hole of financial independence and figuring out all this stuff myself.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I really want to draw attention to about your story, because we know each other, outside of this call a little bit. You started in a corporate job, like you did the college thing, you finished, you started your first job, and very quickly you were like, man, this sucks. I hate this. And I think that was also like a cool thing because you're like, all right, well, with this financial independence idea, I can take control of my income, my time, and I don't have to be reliant on this, full-time job for the rest of my career. So yeah, I think that's a really cool part of your story. What was so bad about this job, by the way? What do you hate? What do you hate about employment?
It honestly wasn't that bad. Like, I'm not going to give too much discredit to the job. It was a great job. I was in commercial real estate lending, making a pretty penny. But after kind of diving into this world and seeing these people who are living these amazing lives, people, like I said, who were retired at 28. One of my friends retired at 28. And I'm like, how is that even possible? And the people I saw in the corporate world were 35, 40, working so hard, making, $300,000 a year, absolutely miserable with their 4 houses and their 5 cars and their timeshare down in Florida and all these things. I know we're going to talk a lot about needs versus wants today, but all these things that they thought would make them happy, but in the end, they're just kind of enslaving themselves in this corporate hamster wheel, working year after year after year, going for the next promotion. And then ultimately, as they get that next promotion, they bump up their lifestyle inflation a little bit more. So I saw the people that were in that corporate job. That was not the life I wanted to chase. And then I saw these other people who were part of this financial independence movement, who were keeping their expenses low, understanding how their money could work for them. And I was like, that is the life I want. So honestly, Rob, my initial plan was I was just going to grind it out in that corporate job for like 7 years, save up as much money as I possibly could. I'll talk about the 4% rule in a little bit. And I was just planning on like saving up like $1 million if that was possible. Hopefully the markets were in my favor, and then just kind of calling it quits. But I ended up calling it quits 7 months into that corporate job, because once I started saving money, I realized how much freedom I had. And I didn't have to wait till the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. At the beginning of the rainbow, I already had so much more freedom than I was giving myself credit for.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be the core of our conversation today. We're going to talk about needs versus wants and really focusing on what is the minimum that you need to survive and then also to be happy, because I think that's an important part of the conversation too. It's not just about like cutting expenses down to the lowest possible that you can just survive and live this way for 10 years and then okay, then now you can start living. Like we don't want to do that either. We want to be happy. We want to be able to thrive with our expenses low. So we really want to dig into that today. So tell me, like, what is the difference between needs and wants for you?
For me, okay.
Yes, because I
For
think
me,
this is different for depending on the person you ask, but I want to know your
totally
opinion.
different. And I think someone who's 15 years old is going to have vastly different needs and wants than me. And someone who's 65 years old is going to have even more vastly different needs and wants than me. But for me, like, needs are obviously, you have Maslow's hierarchy of like actual basic needs like air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction is the last one there. Those are the actual like bottom rung of needs that the human race needs to survive and reproduce and things like that. But for me, like let's tag on a couple other things. So yes, I obviously need air to breathe. I need water to drink, so I'm not dying of thirst. Food, and now food, we can kind of get into a little spectrum of needs and wants here, because some people say I need to go out to eat because I like hanging out with my friends, or I need this organic egg versus this cheap egg because I'm supporting like cage free. There's so many different things that go into it, but like I guess that is a basic need, food. But again, it's a spectrum. It depends like which rung you are on that spectrum. Shelter, that's another one that's on the spectrum. Like the first two, the air and water, those aren't really refutable at all. Both of those are free, which is nice most of the time, unless you're just drinking Voss water all the time, something crazy like that. But so shelter, so you could either have, I mean, you could honestly either crash on someone's couch, or you could live under a bridge as long as you're kind of shielded from the elements, or you could have a fancy apartment that you're paying $5,000 a month. Yes, those are both shelter, but those are both vastly different when it comes to your spending and personal finance.
Yeah, if we're talking if we're talking the physical need, it's just literally like you don't want to freeze to death and you don't want to burn to a crisp in the sun. Like you just need shelter from the elements enough that you can survive. Okay, yeah.
But I guess the level of shelter is totally different to different people. Yeah. And something I want to talk about, I'll kind of swing back to this in a second, is like even in the the human race, even in different countries and different pockets and different regions of the same country, like those needs and wants might be vastly different between people. And then there's the sleep. I guess that one's kind of like air and water. I mean, unless you're paying for sleep, which would be strange. There's clothing. So you could go out and buy all Gucci clothes, or you could go to Salvation Army and get some clothes, or you could just get clothes donated and get them for absolutely free. They all serve the same function, but it's how comfortable you are and how much you want to spend. And I'm not even going to touch on reproduction for this.
No need. We get it.
no need for that one. Okay, so let's kind of circle this back. So one thing I really wanted to talk about was like, especially in this financial independent space, a lot of people will call themselves and be called frugal. And even the frugality is such a spectrum. Like someone who's frugal, I consider myself frugal. Rob, I think you also would consider yourself frugal. But someone who's frugal in a developed country like the US might seem like royalty to someone who's balling out in a developing country. Like,
now, does frugal for you mean cheap, or does it mean like I spend very wisely, but I don't buy a lot of things?
Wisely.
Okay.
I think frugal and cheap are definitely two different things. Like the way that I've explained it, and that's what it's been explained to me, is frugal is when you're making decisions that will not negatively impact those around you or businesses around you, but will serve yourself. It will benefit yourself. But cheap is when your actions are going to negatively affect either businesses or people around you or things like that. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I like to think of it.
Yeah. So like when you are a frugal person, like you are always looking for a good deal. It's not always the cheapest thing on the shelf, but it might be the balance. Like you don't want the most expensive, you don't want the cheapest, but you want the one that will serve the function. It's probably got a decent level of quality and it's not like over the top expensive. And usually you're looking for a deal as well. Like you're always kind of conscious about the things that you are buying and consuming in some way. Another kind of group that comes under this sort of umbrella is the minimalist group, where it's like the least amount of things possible, but again, can kind of come into that value play. Like the things that they buy are often like high quality, but still looking for a deal. Whereas cheap, you're just looking for like the lowest quality, lowest price things. You overconsume. So like you might buy $5 t-shirts because you're like, all right, every couple of months, I'll just buy a new one. As opposed to like getting a $20 one that will last you longer.
Definitely.
Something like that.
Absolutely.
All right. So the spectrum on like needs. So thinking about food, because I think that's kind of the most obvious one to go to for, you guys listening at home. Like if you're a high school student, the amount of things that you actually have to pay for yourself are pretty low. Food is typically one of those things that you start paying for. So we need food to survive. We need X number of calories a day in order to be able to sustain our body's functions, allow us to keep growing, keep healing, repairing, and all that sort of stuff. Like that's the basic functions of food. You need to hit your food pyramid, make sure you're getting all the nutrients you need. After that, does all food just become a want?
No. I mean, maybe there's, like I said, there's a spectrum. And so for me, like, yes, I could survive off just, I think potatoes is like one of the only foods you can literally survive just eating potatoes.
The
Or
Irish proved it.
or just rice and beans. But like, to be honest, I don't want to eat just potatoes and just rice and beans. Like, I want some variety in my diet. Yes, I could survive, but survivability, I think it's worth the little extra splurge on things like vegetables and other foods other than potatoes, rice, and beans. So obviously there is a spectrum there, but then there's people, and this might sound crazy to someone who's like 15 years old in high school, but there's people who will spend $1,000 to $2,000 on going out to eat multiple times per week. Now that to me seems like a crazy frivolous thing. But to someone who has a bunch of money, and again, it's a spectrum, someone who has a bunch of money, they don't feel like cooking. They're like, you know what? I need to go out to eat. And it might seem like a silly need to some of us, but some people consider that a need. They're like, I'm not cutting that out of my budget. That's something that I really, really value. And that's something that I couldn't live without. And even like the quality of grocery food. Like, someone could go to the grocery store. I actually have a podcast. My co-host, he's notorious for spending such a small amount on groceries per month. He was spending $65 on groceries per month at one point. But then you see the average American household, which is spending $660 per month on groceries. And that's the average. So there's people doing way more than that. And there's people down toward Justin's level. So there's a whole spectrum when it comes to this. And like you said, Rob, when you're not buying the groceries, it doesn't seem, it doesn't really click for you. Like, you don't understand how much food costs. But then when you start buying your own food, especially at first, especially when you're going from like high school to college and then college to your first job, if you choose to go to college, it's crazy how much the lifestyle creep and lifestyle inflation hits some people. Like myself and all my friends, I just graduated college 3 years ago. And when you're in college, I mean, you're eating whatever you can get your hands on. No one has a lot of money. And then all of a sudden you get your first big boy or big girl job. And all of a sudden you're going out to eat multiple nights a week. And your food budget for the month goes from $100 to $1,000. It's crazy how much those needs and wants, or supposed needs and wants, shift in the matter of a year or two once that income starts to build up.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of probably at home see the theme that's building up here. It comes down almost to the level of, I'm going to put privilege on this, that you have in terms of how much income you have, where you live, the country you live in is super important here as well in terms of your access to different things. So this is going to be very different depending on every single person you talk to. Level of income is going to make a big difference. Size of family, living in a city versus a country for access to different things. Like, there is so many factors here that are going to determine what is a need, what is a want. And a lot of people can make arguments for something being a need versus a want. So Cody's example of the person who spends a lot of money on going out to eat, or getting takeaway, or having a personal chef come into their house. Like, there are people like this out there, and they will make the argument that this is a need because that time that they are saving from having to buy groceries or cook their own food can be used elsewhere in a productive way. And there can be an argument made for that. So be aware that it's not just frivolous to go out to eat. Certainly, yes, you could do it cheaper. You could do it at a much lower cost, as your friend Justin proves. But there is kind of a balance that plays out, and you have to decide what it is that you value in your life. So, like, what is the level of comfort you want to have in terms of your shelter, in terms of your clothing, in terms of your food? Is eating organic important to you? Do you want to be vegan or vegetarian? Are you looking for cruelty-free animals that are raised in a responsible way? Like, there are so many different things that could come into play here that would shift something from being a need to a want. So, all right, let's, is there anything else you want to talk about with food before we move into the next step?
I think that's pretty much everything with food. I think once we kind of get done with this conversation, because I'm going to talk about the 4% rule and how extra spending each month can translate into huge dollars that you have to save down the road to retire. So yeah, let's move on to the next one, and we can kind of just build on the same theme.
All right, you got a fun story for this one. So let's talk about housing. What
right.
do you need for shelter? Like, what's the most basic form of shelter that you've had?
That I've had personally?
Yeah.
So I've pretty much shared rooms my entire life, especially in like college and stuff, up until, actually I still share a room with my girlfriend now, but I had like a roommate previously, like all through college and stuff, just because it was a lot cheaper. And it makes a lot of sense, especially to those in high school. Like, I loved having sleepovers with my friends, and it was a fun time. But then I don't know, some weird things happen in adulthood when, you need your own apartment and you're spending $2,000 a month to live in X, Y, or Z city. And it becomes absolutely crazy to me, like how much people spend in housing. And this is one of the big things I wanted to focus on. And I'll talk about transportation probably after this, but having like, if you can get your housing under control, some of the other categories that we're talking about, like the needs versus wants, you can be a lot more frivolous in those categories. Like if you have your housing down to a couple $100 a month rather than $1,000 a month or more, like you have so much more spending room in those other categories, like whether it be entertainment or food or just other random frivolous things. So I will take a second and explain the 4% rule, because I've kind of been dancing around the concept, but I think it's such an important thing, especially for people who are young, people who are in their teens or in their 20s to understand. So basically the 4% rule is this rule of thumb in the personal finance, financial independence space that says that if you save up a sum of money, you can live off of 4% of that big sum of money indefinitely almost. And obviously there's cases where this might not be true, but it's just kind of a rule of thumb. So let's say you save up $1 million. 4% of that $1 million is $40,000. So if you save up $1 million and you put that into what's called the market, basically you're just investing in the stock market as a whole, like the entire, what's called the S&P 500, or a little tiny piece of every single company in the States, and some, you can even have some out of the States. On average, those return about 7%. That's the average from the past 100 years, adjusted for inflation and all that good stuff. So with the 4% rule, you're just hoping that on average, over all of these years, that you're earning more than 4%, and then your money, that big nest egg, should stay the same. So let's say you have $1 million. The next year, the market returns 4%, and the market, again, just the general stock market. Now you'll have $1,040,000 sitting in that account. You can spend that $40,000 and you still have that $1 million sitting in that account. So the base or the principal never gets touched. So that's basically the idea in a nutshell, is like you can save up this big amount and then just live off the interest. So I know a lot of you might have checking accounts and you get interest every month and it's like 0.01%. Just think of that interest on a much grander scale and you can actually live off of that. So I'm going to use this 4% rule to kind of frame how much extra spending can affect what you need to save in retirement. So if we reverse engineer the 4% rule, so 4% of that $1 million, again, is $40,000. If we want to get from 40,000 to that $1 million, you multiply by 25. It's just basically the inverse function. So basically whatever you have to spend per year, you multiply by 25, or per month times 300. So let's pretend, it doesn't matter what it is, could be housing, could be transportation, could be whatever. Every $1,000 in extra spending per month is $300,000 extra dollars you'll need in retirement, in that big nest egg, in order to retire. So
let's just make sure we got where that number came from. So if we're talking about the 4% rule, you're going to take your annual expenses, so how much you're spending per year, times 25. That gives you that big number, that 1 million in Cody's example, that you need to save up so that you can live off that 4%. And he said, all right, if you go monthly, so now you've got annually was 25, multiply that by 12, you're at 300. So for every $1,000 you spend per month, multiply that by 300. That's the amount you would need to save in order to be able to, for the rest of time, produce that $1,000 to live off per month. So yeah, back to you, Cody. $1,000 extra every month is $300,000 we got to save over there, the course of our life to hit this financial independence. Yeah, it's nothing, right?
It's just absolutely crazy. And I didn't really understand this. I had no idea of this mindset or this way of thinking until I got into this financial independent space. But it's like, if you can live off of, and I'm sure this doesn't sound like an outlandish number to high school kids, if you can live off of, say, $20,000 per year, and you're using the 4% rule, let's do the inverse thing. So times 25, you're looking at only $500,000 that you have to save up if you're going to maintain that $20,000 per year lifestyle. Now, of course, once you get a family and once your tastes maybe start to improve a little bit, and you have a little bit of lifestyle inflation, which is normal, it might go a little bit higher than that. But just knowing that you can pretty much survive, and of course there's some circumstances where this might not work out perfectly, but you can survive saving up $500,000, and that might seem like an outlandish sum of money, but it's really not that hard when you have compound interest working for you and you're putting as much money away as you possibly can. That was just mind-boggling revelation for me. And another thing I like to do is like thinking of your money in terms of time. And this is kind of on the same thread. So Rob, you alluded earlier, I did quit my corporate job really early. But what I was doing during that corporate job was I was saving as much as I possibly could. I was saving like almost 90% of my income. So within 7 months, I had saved up $35,000. At
Wow.
that time, my monthly expenses were $1,000 a month, give or take. It would like float between 900 and 1100. I was being super, super frugal with all of my expense categories. So when you think about your money in terms of time, like that $35,000, that might seem really insignificant to someone who's established and who has a corporate job. That might be a bonus to someone who's in
Mhm.
banking or one of these really highfalutin professions. But to me, that was 35 months of freedom. That was 35 months of freedom if I didn't make a single dime in anything else I was doing. So like that's another thing I like to teach people is like if you can start saving money early, you are building yourself a financial runway. You're building yourself a cushion so that you have this time freedom, and every single dollar that you spend or every single dollar you plan to spend in the future is tugging a little bit farther away on that freedom rope. So like that's how I like to think of it, and that's how I like to frame it. Like every single dollar that you don't spend and that you put in either a savings account or that you put in an investment account, that is earning you one step closer to freedom. And every dollar you are spending is tugging you a little bit further away from that ultimately financial freedom.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's such an important idea, guys. And we're going to kind of go back to a couple of expense examples in a second here, but I want you to really start thinking about this now in terms of that lens. So, the first one we're going to talk about is cars. And cars, like we talk about buying cars in thousands, like how much are you going to spend on a car? And for every thousand that you kind of knock off that and say you could put into savings, like you're buying a lot of freedom in your future by doing that. So really think about it. So Cody, let's talk about cars. A lot of high school kids I meet, they're getting ready to buy that first car. You know, they get their driving license, they've gone through driver's ed, like I'm ready for my first car. And you get the spectrum. You get the kids who take on a car payment and buy like a brand new car. You get the kids whose parents give them a car. You get the ones who, you know, grind and save up a couple hundred and buy their first beater. Like, what should we be thinking about when it's like when we're buying that first car?
Well, I love that you just said that. Like, I think the awesome thing about, I mean, kids buying cars in high school, and myself definitely included, is like, who cares what you're driving? Like, everyone just wants a car to get around. Nobody is, hopefully, in high school going out and buying a $40,000 car and financing it. Like, you're getting the beater. You're just getting the car that gets you around. But then it's that crazy thing that happens. It's that lifestyle creep, that lifestyle inflation is right when you get that first job. I've had so many friends that go out and buy a new car. They start leasing a new car. And going back to those examples, like if you're,
Yeah.
so let's say you buy a $2,000 beater and it will maybe run for a couple of years. That's a 2,000 that's one and done. Now let's go say you start leasing a car or you buy an expensive car and now you have a $500 a month car payment. And let's just pretend that goes into perpetuity. That's an extra $150,000 that you'll have to save in that big nest egg I was talking about before in order to hit that retirement number where you can withdraw the 4% and live on that indefinitely. So like, it's just crazy to me that people spend these astronomical sums of money, but it's because they don't understand the big picture of how your money can work for you.
Okay. So let's start with, is a car a need or is it a want?
That's tough. And it really depends on the situation. I mean, for some people, it's probably a really, really high need. It's definitely not a want when it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like you can get around on a bike, you can get around walking, but let's say you secure a job that's 50 miles away. It seems a little ridiculous that you would bike or walk into work. That seems a bit crazy to me. Of course, it's possible, and you can wake up at 2 a.m. and bike there as fast as you possibly could to get there for your shift or whatever. But I think it's a really high want. I mean, yeah, a really high want for some people.
Yeah, and for me, I look at it as if a car is what is needed for you to be able to earn an income that allows you to provide food, shelter, water, clothing for yourself, to provide those basic needs, then a car does become a need. So say you're living out in the country somewhere and like Cody said, like you're miles away from your place of employment. Like you can't find employment in your local area that you could walk or bike to. So you need a car to get to that place that allows you to make money. Okay, yes, a car is a need. Does it need to be a $20,000 car? No,
No.
like a $500 car that puts away down the road, like that'll be just fine. Um, what about, is there anybody who does need a nice looking car? Like, what about that argument? Like people are like, oh, I sell real estate. And if I rolled up in this like beater car, nobody would take me seriously. Like, is there that thing, or is that just like a myth about money in your opinion?
So I think there is some truth to that, but I liked the phrasing you used there, Rob, is a nice looking car. And a nice looking car and an expensive car do not have to be one and the same.
Mm.
So what I tell people, a lot of people ask for car advice, and it's like if you can find a 3 to 5 year old car from a person, not a dealership. So I'm going to give you guys one piece of advice. If you take one thing away from this about transportation or cars, please don't buy a car from a dealership, especially new off the lot. Like they are just like, those guys had to make money too. Those guys had to make put food on the table. So they're making a pretty decent penny when you go and buy a car from a dealership, or especially please do not lease a car from a dealership. If you can find a car from someone, whether it's on, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, your aunt, whoever, a friend of a friend, that's 3 to 5 years old, you can still find a pretty rad, a pretty nice looking car. And maybe it might not be a beater. It might not be $2,000, but maybe you can get a car for $5,000 to $7,000.
Yeah.
That's not unreasonable at all for a 3 to 5 year old car with maybe, sub 100,000 miles on it. It's still going to look nice, even if you're that real estate agent or someone who needs to show up and look like they got it going on. You can still get that car, and it can be at a fraction of the price of driving a $40,000 car off the lot and financing it, paying all that interest.
Yeah, and I'll give you another example. There's a student I currently teach, just graduated, and this kid is like so impressive. He's got his own landscaping business and makes more than you and I combined in 1 year. It's awesome, like how much he is doing with this. But he made the argument that, you know what, I need to get a pretty decent, reliable truck. And reliable was the key word he threw out there. And as soon as he said that, I was like, yes, you know what you're talking about here. So because his business was dependent on him being able to get to a location, and he had to be able to pull a trailer, carry all this equipment, a truck that was going to be reliable. So he needed something that was a little bit newer, a better, brand name for a truck. It was like, yeah, you got it. And he knew that the numbers would work out, that, this made sense for his business. He wasn't just being frivolous and saying, oh, you know what, I need a truck because trucks are cool, or I need a nice looking truck because it's really impressive to my friends, or I just kind of want a nice truck. Like there was a very definite system of thinking as to why he needed this particular type of truck, how old it was, horsepower, and that sort of thing. So that's just one of the way you can think about it. If you're going to be driving a ton of miles delivering pizzas, do you want to buy a brand new car and start racking up a ton of mileage on this thing? Because the more miles you put on a car, guys, the less your car is worth. Like you really drive the value of your car down the more miles you put on it. And you have to put more repairs into it and that sort of thing. So if you're going to be doing a job like pizza delivery where it's a lot of miles, think about okay, I need the cheapest car possible that I can put a lot of miles on. So cheap and reliable is kind of the combo you're looking for there. Because nobody cares what kind of car a pizza guy or pizza girl delivers in. It doesn't matter. As long as the pizza's hot and it gets there on time, we're good.
Definitely. One thing I do want to talk about just for a second, Rob, and because the biggest pushback I get on this is well, I don't want to drive a crappy car for the rest of my life or whatever. But one of the things I focus on, especially with people in this age group, in this demographic, is if you can sacrifice early, and so now I'm going to talk about kind of the other side of things, like the compound interest. If you can sacrifice early, you can still have those nice things down the road. It's just once you have that solid financial footing, you can still have that Beamer or that Buick or the Maserati when you're 60 years old, as long as you get your financial stuff in order when you're young. So an example I love to use with young people is the rule of 72. And so basically the rule of 72 states that if you divide 72 by your expected rate of return, and if you guys were listening, pay attention earlier, let's see if you remember what the average rate of return was in the general stock market over the past 100 years, 7%. So 72 divided by 7%, it's about 10. That 10 represents the number of years it will take your money to double. So this is the example I love giving people. And it might seem outlandish, but I'll break it down a little bit more. So let's say you save $100,000 by age 25. And yes, that's a huge number.
Mm-hmm.
It might seem completely unattainable for some people. But let's say you have a little bit of student debt and you come out of school, you come out of college, or even high school, you can get a good job out of high school. You're making $60,000. That's I think that is the median coming out of college, what people are making nowadays. You save half your income. And so you didn't get any lifestyle inflation. You're living as cheap as possible. This is totally doable. I've done it. And you save up $30,000 over each year for 3 years. We'll just call it $33,000. So you got that $100,000. Just wanted to kind of show you how it was possible getting to that point. Because $100,000 seems like an insurmountable amount. Using the rule of 72, you're 25 with $100,000. By the age of 35, this is without any additional contributions. This is just with letting your money ride. you're going to have on average $200,000. When you're 45, $400,000, 55, $800,000, 65 years old, $1.6 million from that first 100K you saved up when you were 25, and you didn't even have to add a penny to it. Like, yeah, that is crazy.
This is compound interest, guys. So the reason that it grew so fast is that first 100,000, it doubled. It became 200,000. That whole 200,000 is still in the market. So it's in the stock market. That whole $200,000 doubles in the next 10 years. So that's where the 400,000 comes from. Another 10 years, that 400,000 doubles to eight doubles to 1.6 million. And you're not done there, because most people live past 60. So like, you could see this thing going for quite a while, and you can create this. I love the word. It was described as a perpetual money-making machine that you can just pass on to the next generation. And basically, if your family managed it well, they would have money for the rest of their lives. They'd never have to worry about it again. So like, what a cool idea that could be.
And that was just like the really hardcore sacrifice. Like I said, that's the sacrifice from up to 25. And then, I mean, letting that money ride, in theory, you could like live paycheck to paycheck. I don't recommend it for the rest of your years until you hit 65. And then you'll have this chunk of $1.6 million sitting in your investment account. So it's just like, do the sacrificing early. Like, don't let the lifestyle inflation hit you. Like, don't let it punch you in the face right when you get that first job where it's just more money than you know what to do with. Because I saw so many of my friends go down this route. Like in college, you have little side jobs. Maybe you're making, if you're lucky, 10 grand a year doing little side jobs and odd jobs. You get your first big job. Now you're making 60K a year, and the paychecks are just more money than you know what to do with. You're like, all right, I guess I'll go lease a car. All right, I guess I'll go get an apartment in the big city for $2,000 a month. All right, I guess I'll go out to eat 4 nights a week. And it just hits you like that. And it's really hard to kind of turn the dial back once that becomes your new norm.
Yeah, unraveling your life, guys, is much harder than just saying it from the beginning. All right. I mean, the term is like live like a college student. And I don't know about you, but like, I love college. Like living on $100 a week, like, was perfectly fun and doable. And yeah, you're doing that from 18 to 22 or whatever it is. Like, if you do that for another 3 years, you hit 25. And just like Cody did, like, you've put half of that, big kid income aside, and you're saying it's invested, it's for future me. Like, you're pretty much done at that point. You get to 25, your 100,000's put away. You could start blowing your entire income and just let the 100,000 ride. And then by the time you get to 65, you've got your 1.6 million. You're good to go. Or you keep saving, and the more you save, the closer you bring that 1.6 million to the current day, pretty much. So you'd say, okay, well, if I do that for another 3 years, well, now, like, we're talking maybe 40 years old, 35, 30, 28. Like, the more you put aside early on, the sooner that you can say, all right, I've reached this financial independence number, I'm good to go. And you kind of get to do whatever you want at that point. Money is no longer a concern in your mind. So that is the beauty of financial independence, guys.
Oh yeah. Couldn't agree more, Rob.
Do you want to play a game with me, Cody?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. So there's this game that I play with my students. It's called Space Quest. And the idea is that it's kind of becoming more realistic now with the NASA kind of launching astronauts back into space again. But imagine that you're being told, all right, you're going to be part of this force that's going to be going to a new planet. You're going to have to explore it for us. Tell us a little bit about it. We're going to send you there. We don't know when we're going to be able to get you back, though. We'll give you 6 weeks supply of food and water, and you've got maybe like a team of 5 people with you. But what would you take with you? So like, you pretty much get the choice of like, what stuff do you want to bring with you? And the caveat I put on is you can only take 16 items, and I give a list of items. So I'm going to show you guys the list very quickly, but if you want to play along with us, the link is going to be in the YouTube notes. So pull it up, pause the video, and come back to me in a second. So what you've got is 40 items that you can choose from, and they range from like all different sorts of things. So you've got, a cow, you've got potatoes, a guitar, a mountain bike. Like, there's just so much stuff here. And there's a little description about what each item could potentially do for you. And you have to choose 16 of those to take with you on this spaceship to a new planet that we don't really know much about. Some things I do tell students, like, there's no other life forms there that we know of in terms of like human sort of life forms or intelligent life forms, we want to call it that. There is breathable air, so you don't have to worry about trying to like breathe while you're there. So other than that, you pretty much don't know anything about this planet, and you got to figure it out for yourself. So if you're watching on this video, pause and take a look at these cards and see what 16 would you take with you. All right, Cody, what 16 items did you say you would take with you?
So I did make one assumption. I just assumed that the temperature was like reasonable,
Okay, good
not like
assumption.
200 degrees or negative 50 degrees, because I think that would drastically change what I brought here. Because like if it was negative 50 degrees, I'd just get every warmth item I possibly could. But I was just assuming it was like, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
I always love
That's
the questions I get from kids, like, is there creatures of any sort? Is there natural elements in the ground? I'm like, I don't know. We can assume these things,
I
though. It's
don't know.
great.
Okay, so I'm gonna just rifle them off and then we'll
Yep,
kind of dig through them.
sure.
Okay. Water purification tablets, laptop computer, smartphone, toolkit, solar powered generator, soil fertilizer, grain seeds, potatoes, baby chickens, backpack, tent, hunting bow, matches, spool of wire, first aid kit, and shovel.
Wow. Okay. I got to go to the laptop computer and the smartphone. Like, are you planning on having like Wi-Fi out there?
So I was going to use a laptop just for record keeping.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
honestly, I like laptopping better than writing on a piece of paper. That's
Hmm.
probably just like the millennial or earlier, like very end of the millennial spectrum in me. I'm faster on a laptop. I'm more comfortable typing on a laptop than I am writing by hand. The smartphone was just because it kind of took a lot of the characteristics from other items and threw it all into one. So with the smartphone, I have a flashlight, I have a compass, I have a calculator, I have a timer, I have a alarm clock. Like I have all those things kind of built into one device. That was the reason why I went with the smartphone. I wasn't planning on making any calls or Skyping anyone back home, but I just figured like smartphones nowadays have so much utility that you can just knock out a bunch of other tools or items that you might otherwise need.
Okay. And then I'm assuming the generator was to keep those things powered.
Yep, solar power generator was to keep the laptop and smartphone rolling.
Okay. So in terms of food, what did you take with you again?
So I have the soil fertilizer because I have no idea what the ground is like there. I have the
Uh-huh.
grain seed, potatoes, and then the baby chickens.
Okay. So you got a little bit of variety in there. You have the ability to grow stuff as well as, chickens, which if you manage your population well, you could potentially keep a food source there as well. So you've got eggs and then meat potentially too.
Yep, and I got the grain to feed the baby chickens. So
It's important. Yeah, you got to have something to feed the chickens with. And yeah, they'll produce their own fertilizer. So like there is that kind of idea. I always go
perfect.
back to the movie The Martian. Like that for
It's
me,
a
that's like,
system.
yeah. Did you ever see The Martian?
I did see that movie. Yeah.
That was a great example. All right. Hunting bow. What was that about?
Well, I don't know what's going to be on that planet. And I mean, it would be nice if I could score some kind of game. It would definitely last me a lot longer and be a lot more filling than the grain seed and potatoes, the wheat and potatoes I'll be eating.
And do you know how to use a hunting bow?
I do. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I have used a hunting bow before. I've used a crossbow. So I'm pretty certain that I could take something down, especially if it's not used to seeing like creatures like me. It'd probably just be stunned.
I would say that'd be useless in my hands. So like I'd have to like learn how to use it while I'm there and then actually be able to use it. But all right. So if you're at home, like what items did you pick? What theme do you see happening? So Cody, like kind of what helped your decision making process with this? So you only had 16 items. What kind of drew you to these 16? What were your
Yeah,
thoughts?
so let's go to my boy Maslow again, the hierarchy of needs. So the water purification tablets, like I just don't want to get like some crazy alien tapeworm or some insane bacteria inside of me and I die within a week. So that's why I got the water purification tablets. I could either collect rainwater or find some streams or whatever and purify the water. The laptop and smartphone, we talked about those.
Yep.
Toolkit, just always good to have a toolkit around if
Handy.
I need to build shelter or whatever. If I need to gut whatever thing I just killed with my hunting bow. um, Solar power generator, talked about that one. Fertilizer, seeds, potatoes, chickens, those are all food source, talked about those. Backpack, it's probably going to be a lot easier if I'm going on long treks, whether it's searching for food or water, to have a backpack to keep everything like the toolbox. Maybe I could sling the hunting bow onto the backpack. I got the tent, so there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Your
The
shelter.
shelter,
Yeah.
in case there's some crazy windstorm or ice storm, whatever it might be. I want to make sure I have that tent keeping me safe. Matches, wasn't sure how many matches I'd have. I've definitely used them sparingly, so I'm definitely going to be eating a mostly vegetarian diet here. But if I do score some big game, like I mentioned with the hunting bow, I'd like to cook it up on a fire instead of just eating it raw like a caveman.
That'd be
Um,
nice.
Spool of wire, that was just, I don't know, it's definitely helpful if you're building stuff to have like a spool of wire, whether it's to wrap twigs together if I'm going to make a raft or some kind of fort or whatever. I just thought that would be helpful because the toolbox would be nice, but if I don't have anything to kind of any kind of adhesive or anything to tie two materials together, it'd be kind of a waste. First aid kit, never know what's going to happen. I might be climbing a tree trying to get some berries and fall and cut myself, and then I have a green oozing wound. So first aid kit would be good, and then the shovel is just to dig up earth and for my super garden.
Yes.
So that's everything on my list.
All right, cool stuff. So the next question I usually ask my students is, actually, budget cuts, the spaceship's gotten a little smaller. You got to cut that down to 8 items. What 8 would you keep?
All right, I'm going to keep the water purification tablets.
Okay.
I'm going to ditch the laptop.
Okay.
Keep the smartphone and generator because, like I said, I think having the compass flashlight combo and all that stuff would be really helpful.
It's a lot of utility in there. You're right.
A lot of utility. Probably ditch the fertilizer because the fertilizer can only help so much. If the soil is so infertile that I can't plant anything, I'm screwed anyway. Mm-hmm. So I'm ditching that. Let's see. You
got the chicken poop too.
True. I got the tablets. I got the smartphone. I got the toolkit. I got the generator. I'll keep the grain seeds. Yeah. And I'll keep the potatoes, chickens. Now I got one more. Let's see. I can rough it out. I won't need the tent. I don't need the backpack if I really don't. Matches. Spool of wire. You know what? I might go hunting bow for that number 8.
All right.
So it's just.
It's like a safety water, and a food. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what I go with.
So yeah, that's always a fun one with students. Like to see, okay, you argued your way through 16 items. Now you got to get your way down to 8.
Yeah, and definitely some sacrifices.
You could go further. You could say, okay, let's go down to 6 or 4, but we won't do that. What you'll notice, guys, is that we're getting closer and closer to what the core needs are for somebody to survive. And that's what you have to think of when it comes to building your budgets in the future. And I really want to talk about the current situation we're in. We're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people have lost their jobs. They've had changes in hours. They've been furloughed, whatever it is. And we've seen dramatic shifts in income and a lot of times down as opposed to up. So this is kind of the equivalent of saying, all right, the spaceship's getting smaller, your budget's getting smaller. You have to cut some stuff out. And you should be looking to keep the things that are core to your essential survival. So you're talking about how do I keep food on the table? How do I keep the lights on, the heat on, or the AC on if you're in a warmer state or a country at the moment? How do I keep the roof over my head? How do I keep gas in the car so that I can keep earning money if I need to? Or the kind of the more modern equivalent now is keeping internet in your house because that's almost like the transportation needed to allow you to do your job. So whichever one of those it ends up being. So what, Cody, would you say are some of the things that you would see in a person's life that they could cut out relatively easily that's in a lot of people's budgets, especially if they have to kind of tighten the belt per se?
I think the big ones are honestly eating out and transportation. And that's speaking from personal experience. A lot of people in my demographic, especially even in my friend group, people in their 20s are spending astronomical amounts of their paycheck or whatever their income source is on those two things. So entertainment, whether it's concerts, whether it's going out drinking at the bar, whether it's some other random extraneous thing, and then eating out. I mean, it's so easy if you're getting drinks and apps to rack up a $70 to $100 eating out tab, even if you're just with one other person. And if you're doing that multiple times per week, you're looking at multiple hundreds or thousands of dollars every single month. So I think those are two things you can cut out pretty easily. You could go to cold turkey on those without making any huge adjustments. And then the big hitters that I like to call them, the 50 percenters, is the housing and transportation. Those are a little bit more difficult you can't just go and probably sell your house tomorrow and downsize to a cheaper house. But if you're looking at this plan over the long run, yes, sell that car that you have right now or stop paying for that lease and get the 5 to 7 year old car that's maybe $4,000. Downgrade from that $2,000 a month apartment and maybe share an apartment with someone, or buy a duplex and rent out the other half. There's so many other options, and of course those aren't as quick hit. You can't just do that in a day. But
you could in some sense. If you've got that $2,000 apartment and it's a 2-bedroom, you're only taking up one. Put an ad on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist right now, and say, okay, I'm going to bring in a roommate and we're going to start splitting the cost of this apartment. That's certainly something you could do. There is a whole video on house hacking, by the way, with Deanna McIntyre. So if you're interested in something like that, go find it and look at that and see the different ways of getting that housing expense down. I love those examples. But the car, if you've got 2 cars sitting in the driveway and you're not really going anywhere right now, sell one of them. And you can always pick up a cheaper car later when you eventually do need it. We talked about, things like internet, cable, cell phones. Those are all things that you can find cheaper versions of typically. So if you're all right, TV is a need because I'm stuck at home. TV should never be a need, guys, but let's just pretend that it is. Can you get rid of some of the packages you have? So for example, if you have something like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, like all at the same time, you can only watch one at a time. Cut out the other two. And then whenever you feel like, oh, I want to go back and get Netflix, they'll take you back, guys. It's okay.
They
Like
will.
you can cancel these things and then in 3 months come back and say, oh, I'd like to renew my subscription. They'll be like, yes, please come back. Like they're never going to say, no, you're gone. You're dead to us now. So don't carry these unnecessary expenses when you don't need them. Cell phones, like if you're paying more than $50 a month for your cell phone, you're probably overpaying for it. Especially if you're spending the majority of your time at home in a Wi-Fi area. Do you need a large amount of data?
One more thing I do want to mention. I think this is a misconception that I see so many people have, because we've been talking, especially, I mean, I see myself doing it now. We've been talking a lot in the framework of like monthly expenses. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of people, they don't understand when they're taking out debt for something that like, they shouldn't just be looking at that monthly number. Like I've seen some people like, oh, I'm only paying $35 a month for my cell phone. And then you look at the plan and it's like a 7-year deal where they're paying $2,500 for an iPhone. It's like, that's not a good deal. Like just that monthly number is not everything you should be looking at. Or someone's like, oh, I'm only paying $180 a month for my car payment. It's like, well, you're on a 15-year car loan. And by the time you're done paying that, you're going to pay almost double what the car was actually worth. So like when you're thinking about those monthly expenses, like stay away from debt as much as possible, because once you start having compound interest work the opposite way and you're paying say 5% interest, it works in a different direction than that rule of 72 I was saying earlier. When your money doubles, your money will actually double in the wrong way with debt. Like you'll end up paying double on something if it's like 7% over a 10-year period, which is crazy, but it stinks.
Yeah. Huge message there, guys. Avoid debt wherever possible. A monthly payment on something that you're borrowing money for is not a way to measure whether you should be buying that or not. So like,
yes,
when it comes to buying a car, yes, a $200 a month car payment seems like a lot less than buying a $2,000 car, but it only takes 10 months before the car payment starts costing you more. And then that could be there for the next 5 years. And a $15,000 car, as Cody said, could cost you nearly $30,000 by the time you finish paying off that loan. So yeah, just be very careful with that. Is there anything else, Cody, you want to talk about before we leave today? I mean, I think we did a really good job of covering like needs versus wants, trying to figure out which is which, and then like when you need to consider like shifting your focus from like getting rid of some wants and focusing more on the needs and so on.
No, I think we covered everything. I mean, it's awesome that you guys are even watching this content. Like the fact that you're interested enough to spend hours digging through these videos and learning new things is so much better of an education than I had, or that many of my friends have had the opportunity to have. And once you understand how this money stuff can work, like it's really not that complicated. And it stinks that your parents are teaching you about this, that most teachers, not Rob excluded, aren't teaching you about this. You just don't learn this stuff. But like, it's really not that. It's not that it's easy, but it's simple. It is simple. You can become a millionaire by the time you're in your mid-30s. If you start, like I said, if you start when you're in your 20s and you just start saving hard every single year. So it's totally possible, guys. Like if you don't believe it, you can dig into people like me and people in this space more, see what we're doing, see the lifestyles we're living. You don't have to get fed this crap that you have to work till you're 65 and that there's only one way to do it. You have to have the American dream with the big house and the 5 cars and the Maserati and the lake house down and over in California. There's so many other ways you can do this, guys. So always think about your freedom when you're looking to spend $1 and know that every single dollar you spend is pulling a little bit away from that freedom rope. So I think that's everything I got for you, Rob.
Yeah. And as you said, like dig more into this community. So say they want to find more about your story. They want to hear more of your content. Where can people find you?
Oh, all over the place, man. So I got my blog. We have a bunch of stuff on there. It's Fly to Financial Independence. I try to teach people how to retire as fast as possible. I have a podcast. If you guys like audio or visual format like this, called The Fi Show. And then from those 2 places, you can probably find all of the other stuff I'm doing, like the Financial Freedom Summit, which is an awesome, huge in-person summit with a bunch of people, have some online courses on side hustling. But yeah, you can find me through those 2 channels there.
All right. Cody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, man. It's been a blast.